Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
With the first pick, the Detroit Pistons select Cade Cunningham from Oklahoma State University.
Chandler again. Oh, what a block by Maxfield! My goodness!
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
There's Jaden playing the passing lane. Skies a jam. Dynamite dunk, and the crowd loves it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing. Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Pistons fans, hello and welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, brought to you by Believe. We've got a good show here today. It's myself, Aaron Johnson. As always, my good friend Jasper Apollonia. Jasper, we've got plenty to talk about. The Pistons are on a win streak, 2 in a row for the boys. We're going to talk about that, what's gone into those games, what's come out of those games. I know James Wiseman has been a hot topic in the Pistons online community as of late. So we're going to talk about all that and more. Certainly excited to get into that. But first off, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. Eric, it's not just 2 in a row. It's 3 out of their last 4, which is something that they have not done this entire season. So it's definitely bright times in Motown, I'm sure, as everybody is feeling. But yeah, it's great to be on here. We actually have some positive things to talk about this week, and that's always a refreshing change up, especially this season, isn't it?
Man, the people in our YouTube comment sections that give us hell every week for always talking so negatively about the team. They're not going to know what to do with themselves after listening to this week's show. But yeah, definitely a lot of good stuff to talk about. Before we get into it, I do want to mention our beloved sponsor, as always, and that's BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all of your basketball wagering needs, including pro and college hoops throughout the year. With up-to-the-minute odds, stats, and trends, you can follow your favorite team's path to the playoffs with live in-game betting, contests, and all of the best player props. Experience the world's best wagering platform anytime from your desktop or mobile device. Head to BetOnline today to become part of the team. And remember to use our promo code BLEAV, BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Again, Believe, BLEAV. Bet online, where the game starts. Jasper, real quick here, let's talk about the NCAA tournament coming up. March Madness, always one of the most fun points of the year. I love it. Most people love it. Who do you like coming out? Do you have a couple teams you're looking at as threats to win it all this year? I know it feels like anyone can beat anyone, and it truly is like that in March Madness. But this year, it really doesn't feel like there's a top team that stands above all, unless maybe it's UConn.
I was going to say, I think UConn obviously is certainly in contention. I'm a big fan of Houston, though. I think Houston, once again, they have the pieces to really make a run at that thing. Like you said, though, it's one of those wide open years, and I'm sure we could talk about 10 different teams on here, and the team that we don't mention, the 11th team, will be the one that wins it all. It just feels like one of those years, doesn't it?
No
Like
doubt.
it's
No
the same.
doubt.
It's the same with this draft. Like, there's 10 guys you could put into your top 10 for your mock, and then number 11 is going to be the one who ends up hitting for this season. So in a lot of ways, I think those tournaments can be a lot more exciting, but in some ways too, they can be a little underwhelming because the best teams might not even make it all that far, and you can be thrown with some a couple wrenches that aren't so easy to dodge, a la dodgeball references right there. You have to forgive me on that. That was really forced, but I just made my girlfriend watch that movie for the first time a couple days ago, so it's still fresh in my mind.
I think for me, I'm a big SEC fan this year. I really think the SEC has some very good teams, and I wanted to say Kentucky could win it all, and I do think they can. But when I saw that they're holding the most public money in terms of winning it and making it to the Final Four. The gambler in me said fade the public, and I'm going to go with their rival, who they played a couple of games against Tennessee. I'm going to fall back into the trap that is Rick Barnes and the Tennessee Volunteers. They have a very, very good team. They have a veteran team, which to me is important late into March Madness. They have a big time scorer. They have a very veteran minded guard, and Josiah James Jordan, who I think has been there since 2015 or something crazy like that. But I'm falling back into the Tennessee trap. I think I'm going to go with them as my official pick. But that's a team I like. There's definitely some other teams. UConn is a wagon as well.
Now, come on. I know the guy who said I'm not going Kentucky because too many people are betting on them is not turning around and then making the rookiest mistake of all rookie mistakes and trusting a Rick Barnes coach team. Enjoy that second round exit. That's all I have to say to you, Aaron. All right. Get real.
Burned me 3 times. It'll probably burn me a 4th time. But what can I say? I'm a volunteer guy at heart. Big Tennessee guy over here. But hey, that's not what the people are here to listen to. They're here to listen to us talk about the 11-win Detroit Pistons, who have won 2 games in a row, wins against the Charlotte Hornets, which I was there for at LCA on Monday. And then on Wednesday night, they beat the Toronto Raptors in what I thought was truly a disgusting display of professional basketball, just very low-level basketball overall. But on the positive side, the Pistons have won 2 in a row. They did so without Ausar Thompson in both of those games. That's probably something we're going to be hitting on throughout the show today as well. But Jasper, I think, Detroit's won these past 2 games. I don't think they've played the best basketball in these wins. I think it's a lot more so a byproduct of, hey, the Pistons have most of their guys. They're playing very bad teams as well who are without key players. And I think the Pistons just maybe didn't play as bad as the other teams did. I know we said we were going to be a little bit more positive today. A couple wins for the Pistons. What I guess are your general opening thoughts on these last 2 games for Detroit, where they're maybe starting to turn a corner?
Well, you know what? I'm going to put a positive spin on what you just said because I don't think you're wrong. These were some pretty gross wins over pretty limited opponents. But the positive thing about that is that the Pistons have faced really limited opponents over this year. They have played some really ugly games over this year, and they've lost them for the most part. So to see Detroit actually going out and winning these kind of toss-up 50-50 games, I think that that's actually a great sign of improvement. Obviously, I'm not, saying, hey, look, playoff run, here we come. But I think that that shows a level of growth, especially mentally as a team, when you can go out there, not play your best game, not be shooting the lights out from the 3, not, shutting teams down defensively, but still finding a way to pull out a victory. I think that Toronto Raptors game was a great example of that. That game was just a slugfest. And I don't mean because they were like 2 heavyweights trading punches. I mean, they were playing like a bunch of slugs, as John Beeline might say. So I just think that, there was a lot of bad basketball played over the last week. But when you can come out of that with 3 wins, when you're a team like the Pistons have been this year, where they have just blown chance after chance. I mean, Nikola Jokic tossed out of the game, you lose anyway. Giannis Antetokounmpo tossed out of the game, you lose anyway. I think that these games are the ones that are actually more indicative of growth within this roster than the ones where, you beat the Bulls because the Bulls shoot a decade worst percentage from 3. Like, I think that these have been some, it might sound odd, but good, ugly wins. And that's something I'll take at this point.
Yeah, it's I guess it's a sign of growth in a way. You're able to beat the teams that you should beat, I guess is the way you can put it. I'm not necessarily overly encouraged by the way that they're playing, but at the same time, if you can get the job done and maybe not play great, that also says something positive about you. I think there's a lot of different players we could specifically talk about from the last week of basketball for the Pistons. I think we should first start off with Jalen Duren. His game against the Toronto Raptors was truly a touching tribute to his predecessor, Mr. Andre Drummond. In the win against Toronto, 24 points, 23 rebounds, 5 assists, and 5 turnovers. Is that not the most Andre Drummond stat line ever? A true tribute to him, because there were some moments where he was absolutely great, but there were also some moments where it was like, I really don't care about the numbers Jalen Duren's putting up right now. This is horrible basketball from him in terms of some early decision making, the fouls, and the turnovers, the passing. Another thing, it was an up and down roller coaster type game from Jalen Duren, yet he still put up historic numbers.
Yeah, the Andre Drummond special, 5 dunks and two personal fouls in the first quarter. I was like, "Oh baby, take me back, back where I belong, mama." Yeah, I think it was the best and worst of Jalen Duren. The best is the reason why you are not giving up on him, because of the bad things that you see with the turnovers and the fouls and the poor defense. But the bad stuff, it definitely just makes you realize how far he still has to go. But I think that the fact that he had such a positive influence on that game, despite having multiple turnovers, bad fouls, poor defense, I think that in and of itself shows like why he is still very much a core part of this team, and a player that really needs to improve going forward. Because if he can clean up those aspects of his game where he's struggling, I think that, sky is still the limit for this guy. And I think they flashed a graphic. Only 3 guys have more 2020 games before their 21st birthday than Jalen Duren in the history of the NBA. And
Was Drummond
that's
one?
certainly some. No, Drummond was not one of them. I believe it was John Lucas, Shaq, and I wish I hadn't brought
Okay,
it up.
I was
I
just
can't
curious
remember
if
the third guy.
his
No, Drummond, Dre was not on there. Dre was not on there. So I think it was just one of those things where, like, you see the best and worst of him a lot of the times in the same games. I think the good parts of his game are definitely what propelled them to victory, because it's hard to see them, winning that game, especially with how ugly the second quarter was for them, without his absolutely dominant performance in the first quarter. I mean, 5 dunks. They could not stop him. He was either getting the lob or he was getting the putback dunk after Jaden Ivey missed a layup. So, yeah, I think it was exactly the best and worst of Jalen Duren, right?
The only thing that stopped Jalen Duren in the first quarter was himself. And it's becoming a little bit of a habit for him, are these bad fouls that he's committing. Plays where he just kind of shoves his arm out there and takes a foul when he really doesn't need to. I mean, was absolutely going off in the first quarter. Would have had a double-double alone in the first quarter had he not committed some silly fouls and had to essentially take himself out of the game. That's the frustrating part with him, because you see the great moments and then you see him take himself out of games with 4 fouls where he's not composed, he's not focused. The passing sometimes is just a little overzealous, trying to do too much. You can appreciate him looking for Stewart on some of these, passes from the free throw line down to the block, but it's just such a tough pass. It's such a tough angle, and Duren just tends to put too much on, and it goes over the head of Stewart. You appreciate him trying to get him the ball, but it's a tough play to make. It's hard enough for guards like Cunningham and Ivy to make that pass. It's really tough for Duren to make that pass. Let's talk about James Wiseman here for a minute. I don't want to stick really too long on any player because there's so many guys to talk about. James Wiseman, the team's backup center behind Duren, who's been getting plenty of minutes, especially with Duren's foul trouble lately, has not so quietly actually. He's loudly had some pretty nice performances in terms of offensive productivity and rebounding for Detroit as of late. A couple big time highlight dunks that have had people going crazy, including people in the media section at the Pistons game. But Jalen Duren's played some good basketball, or excuse me, James Wiseman has played some good basketball over these last few games, at least on the offensive side of the court. I do think he's also made some strides defensively as well, maybe making us eat our words a little bit, but my caution would be it's the end of the season. This is when guys get more opportunity, play a little freer, and in this case specifically are also playing against bad teams, down key guys that probably aren't necessarily trying their hardest to win and compete in these basketball games. I mean, I'm not totally taking away the credit from Wiseman. He has made a couple spectacular plays, and you can see improvement from, you know, the beginning of the year, the beginning of even 2024 to now. But I do think there's a caveat there, and I think we have to be mindful of that as we evaluate him over these last few weeks.
Perhaps, but I think once again, I'm going to be the one putting a positive spin on this. Look, this is the best, and it's crazy to say this with games, but like this is the best stretch of James Wiseman's career in terms of the basketball he's playing right now. It's the first time in his entire career that he's had a positive box plus minus in 4 straight games. His entire career as an NBA player. I don't think you could just discount that. Look, over his last 4 games, he's playing nearly 20 minutes, 11 points, 8.5 rebounds, an assist and a half and a block and a half per game with only 1 turnover. I think he's playing really positive basketball. And it's not just the results. It's not just that he's rebounding and scoring. It's the way he's playing. The way that he, rejected the dribble handoff yesterday and just spun into the middle of the paint, took off for a monster dunk. That was something I just have not really seen from James Wiseman. There was another play that he made where he had the ball and he faked as if he was going to drive and then passed it out for an open 3-point shot. That's not something that I can really recall seeing from James Wiseman over these last 2 years, really in his entire NBA career, even when he was with the Golden State Warriors. So I think there is a lot of positives to take from this. Yes, it is a short stretch of games, but I think that everything he's doing, as long as he continues to do it, is replicable, especially on the defensive end of things where he's playing a lot more restrained with his defense. And that's allowed him to get up for some big blocks over the last few games instead of, just throwing his body into the offensive player or getting overzealous and jumping too soon. He shut down Luka Doncic on a possession. Hold up your bingo card if you had that one for 2024. That's not something I've seen from Wiseman. And I think the number one difference, and something that he has even given credit to, is the arrival of Taj Gibson in Detroit. And it's one of those things where, once again, it's hard not to be frustrated because we on this very podcast have been saying all year, where are the veteran bigs to help guys like James Wiseman and Jalen Duren start to progress? Where are the guys who are going to teach them these tricks of the trade? I mean, I think it was 2 podcasts ago, Aaron, we were literally talking about this exact same thing. And you see James Wiseman last night after the game, one of the first things he says when he's questioned about it by Johnny Kane is Taj Gibson. It's giving him a lot of confidence. He's working with him. He's in his ear. He's telling him just to play within his game. And it might sound silly if you're somebody that is, not around the NBA to be like, a guy is telling you, hey, play better, so you play better. But I think it's one of those things that's true in anything you do, any job you have. If you have a coworker that's there giving you just little tips on how to be a little bit better and giving you the confidence to feel like you can grow, it could go a really long way. So I think we have to give a lot of credit to Taj Gibson for coming in and immediately providing the veteran presence that we've been begging for all season.
I think there's something to be said about hearing it from a player, from a teammate, compared to a coach, even if they are a former player. There's just something different that maybe wires you a little bit differently and says, okay, if the guy that could take my minutes, or if the guy that is next to my locker is telling me to do this or that, I think there's an extra value to that. And so even though Gibson hasn't played a minute for the Pistons, I think you cannot doubt that he's had an impact on this team. Sitting there and watching him on Monday, anytime James Wiseman made a play, Taj Gibson was the first one up, the loudest, the most expressive in terms of cheering and rooting on Wiseman. And for as silly as that might be, for talking about grown men playing a game, there is legitimate importance to that, as silly as it sounds. And you appreciate him coming in and being a class act adult on this team, a class act veteran on this team, because I don't know what he was told when he took this 10-day contract. Maybe this was specifically asked of him, but there could be guys that have the mindset of, I just signed a 10-day contract. I need to get minutes so I can prove I belong and earn a contract for the rest of the season, or bring my stock up heading into free agency for next year. And that hasn't been the case with Taj Gibson whatsoever. So as silly as it sounds, I think he's had a great impact on this team. And I do want to give credit to Wiseman. I'm not trying to be negative about it. I'm just trying to be cautious about it, because I think some of the stuff he's done, specifically defensively, is really impressive. He has been much better at not fouling every time a player comes near the paint. It was the leaving the feet way too early, jumping and lunging at guys, rather than using the 7'3" wingspan that he's blessed with to contest shots and alter shots at the rim. That was the kind of stuff that just kind of drove you crazy. And he's been much better at it over this last week or so. Especially, it really stood out to me in these past two games. I mean, he had 3 blocks yesterday against the Raptors, and it was because he was picking his spots on when to go up and contest a shot in the air, just putting his hands up on some plays, not moving his body forward, staying straight up. All of that stuff matters, and it makes him playable. It makes him from being a net negative overall to, hey, if he's going to start leveraging his size more, not just defensively, but also offensively. I think he's done a really good job of getting deep into the paint, not just standing there and posting, not kind of coming off a pick and just kind of meandering near the free throw line, but making sure he's rolling and getting down low and putting himself in position to catch these passes from a guy like Cade Cunningham, who he seems to play well with and who does a really good job of getting him the basketball in tough spots. But Wiseman has genuinely made legitimate improvements over this last week or so, where it's really, really stood out. So it's encouraging. It's just I want to be cautious with it, because he is due for a new contract this summer, and I'm curious what that will look like. I've said before, I think he's going to be back with the Pistons, but I'm not sure what that number is going to look like.
I wasn't so sure about it, but this last little stretch, if he can continue this type of play, I do think he's probably going to get another look. And look, I'll be completely honest. If he can maintain this kind of play, this style of play, these things that I think are easily replicable, if he just goes in every night with the right mindset and the right outlook on how to play his game, I'm totally fine with bringing him back next year as a backup big. I truly am. And I agree with you. There needs to be a level of caution. There needs to be more. But the things that he's doing, exactly for the reasons you said, like, they make me more hopeful about his future in the NBA, not just for this team, in the NBA in general, than I ever have in his time in Detroit. Like, I just think the way that he's playing defense last night, like there was a possession. One thing we've complained about is the way that the Pistons play drop coverage, especially when James Wiseman's been in the game. Last night, there was a drop coverage possession when they were defending the pick and roll where he dropped and then knew exactly when to come forward to come up for the contest. And he actually contested the shot without just letting a guy get an open floater off in the lane. And I was like, who is this guy? Who is this? Because I've never seen this kind of play from James Wiseman. The defensive possession where he shut down Luka Doncic against the Mavericks. I've never seen that kind of defensive possession. And I think it's exactly what you said, Aaron. It's an increased awareness of where he is on the floor, what he needs to do, how to play as a big man, and the movement. The amount of movement he's giving is just not something I've seen before. So a lot of credit to Taj Gibson. And yet, once again, though, it's another one of those situations where you're like, good on Troy Weaver for bringing him in, but also bad on Troy Weaver for taking this long to bring in a veteran big that now you're seeing, and we've been saying all year, so desperately needed in order to help these young guys improve.
One other note I'll make on Wiseman, Monty Williams has been incredibly complimentary of him. He had talked about both pregame and postgame from the Charlotte game about how James Wiseman has consistently been one of the first guys in, one of the last guys out, is always in the gym working, is always staying late and trying to get extra reps. He's had a really good attitude. He's been upset when he hasn't played, but it hasn't been an upset that has, had a negative impact on the team. It's been like a motivating upset, and he's really been putting time and effort into getting better. And I think we're seeing that play out. So I will certainly give Wiseman credit. And let's talk about something that's probably a little bit concerning, and that's Ausar Thompson, who we found out late into the day on Monday against the Hornets that he was going to miss the game. They talked about him having asthma, which was something that I don't think most of us knew for this was the first time we had heard of it. Since it has been deemed a medical issue or medical reasoning, it was no longer just an illness, which is what was originally talked about. And then Monty Williams said that there would be an official update on Ausar Thompson soon. So that doesn't necessarily sound the greatest. It sounds a little bit concerning to me. I know we're getting late into the season. This is when teams definitely do start thinking about shutting certain players down. I don't think the Pistons would be shutting Ausar Thompson down without reason. I certainly think he needs all the minutes on the court that he can get. But it would certainly be an unfortunate situation if Thompson has to miss extended time or perhaps miss, the rest of the season here with just three or so weeks left.
Well, if he's missing the rest of the season with asthma, I think then you have to ask some real questions of the Pistons, their scouting department and their medical staff, because look, I understand asthma is especially for an athlete, a very serious condition. But that's not something that be taking you out of the last 20 plus games of the season. Like that to me would be a major red flag. So I do think he's probably going to be back by this weekend. That's kind of my guess. I don't blame them for being cautious, especially with something as delicate as asthma. Believe it or not, when you are running up and down the court for 30 minutes a game at full speed, it's kind of important to be able to breathe. So I don't blame them for exercising caution here. It is a little bit of a shame that it happened when it did, because I thought he was playing outstanding defense in that Dallas Mavericks game, even if his shot wasn't necessarily falling. Like I know they ended up getting kind of blown out, but like I think they might have been able to stick in that game if they had been able to continue using Ausar on Luka. They were at a net rating that was equal when he was playing, and then kind of after that, it all just kind of fell off a cliff there. So I'm not too worried about Ausar. I don't know if you are, Aaron, but I think he'll be fine. I think he'll be back. On the plus side, and I'm just saying this is like, take it what you will. It has allowed the Pistons to play that starting lineup of Cade, Ivy, Duren, Stewart, and Fontecchio. And the results of that have been very positive. I know it's something we've talked about on this podcast last week. But that starting lineup, they played 54 minutes together. We're talking about a net rating of plus 23.5 points. And almost counterintuitively, the biggest reason for that is that they're playing really good defense together. I mean, that defensive rating is at like 96 with those five guys on the floor, and the offensive rating's close to like 120. So I think it's been good to at least see that lineup get a little bit of extended run if you are going to take one positive from a star missing these games.
Yeah, I hope he's back soon, just for his own sake. You just hope it's not anything serious. Don't want to get caught, speculating on a player's health, especially when it comes to a medical condition. So hopefully he's back soon and he's all good there. Another player I want to talk about, and I've been considering writing about, is Quentin Grimes, who returned for the Pistons a few games ago, and a good defender, an active player. You can tell he works hard. You can tell he competes. Eventually, though, these shots have to start falling, or we're going to have a more serious conversation about his viability as a player for this team.
Yeah, it's funny you bring this up because I was just thinking the exact same thing as I was watching that game last night, Aaron. It's difficult, and I think you're starting to see why Tom Thibodeau, even though Quentin Grimes absolutely fits the mold of a Tom Thibodeau player, was like, I don't know if I can have this guy in my rotation. Because if the shot isn't falling, what is he really giving you on the offensive end of the ball? And don't get me wrong, we, like many people who follow the NBA, miss higher level defensive outputs from players. Like, I'm not saying I want to go back to 2002, but I do miss a little bit of the ability for players to play that physical defensive brand of basketball. And it's something I really appreciate watching from Quentin Grimes. The way he sticks on guys defensively, it really actually reminds me quite a bit of a former Piston, Avery Bradley, who was just that same kind of tenacious defender. But Avery Bradley had the same issue in Detroit, where he gave you so little offensively that you basically ended up having to dump him. And I worry that, much like Boston did with Bradley, the Knicks may have done a similar thing with Quentin Grimes to Detroit. Do I still think it was worth trying that trade? Yes. I mean, I don't know if you were going to get a better return for Boyan and Burks. It just is what it is in that situation. It was worth taking a flyer, I think. However, you need to see more from Grimes, especially on the offensive end. And it's wild to me that he's had so many ball handling possessions for this team. That dude is not a playmaker. Like, let's call it what it is. And if they are going to get his shot to start falling, he needs to be playing more off ball. So that's something I'd like to see a lot more of, is maybe him coming off of screens, posting, spotting up in the corner. I just think they need to be able to get him the ball without asking him to be dribbling so much, because that's not his game right there. And I think you're doing him a disservice by giving him those possessions as of right now, especially with Sasser back in the floor.
Yeah, he's doing too much ball handling, and he's not a cutter. He's not an active cutter to the basket. He's not a downhill driver. And so when he's hunting these shots, these outside shots, and he's not making them, that's the problem, right? And he gives you good minutes defensively, and he works hard on that side of the court, and you appreciate that, and you see the impact that he makes on that side of the court. But it can only get you so far if he's going to kill offensive possessions for you. And it really stuck out to me in the Toronto game, because it was like they needed his defense out there, but he just could not buy a basket, and he started hunting that outside shot, and it just didn't go well for him. So that's a player that I'm monitoring. He's under contract for next year, so you assume he's going to be back on the team. I think he's extension eligible this offseason, so he could sign an extension, but either way, he's under contract for next year, so he'll be back with the team, you would imagine. So it's not like they have to make a decision right now or in the next few months. That's a guy I could certainly see not signing an extension this year and having to earn it and play it out next year, and then he'll be a restricted free agent in the following offseason. But that's a player I'm monitoring, because that was the big get from the New York trade after, moving off of Bogdanovich and Alec Burks. And so far, the return has been a guy that hasn't been able to suit up. And when he has, he gives you some nice things defensively, but it's hurting the team on offense. So that's a guy I am certainly monitoring for Detroit throughout the rest of the year. Let's talk about, there's really one more thing that I want to talk about for this week's show. And that goes back to, again, the Toronto game. Third quarter, Cade Cunningham comes out. It was at 27 and a half minutes played, had 19 points, 6 assists. Wasn't, lighting the world on fire per se, but he also kept Detroit in that game at times, specifically when he came back in the second quarter when everyone else just was playing awful basketball. And then he never came back into the game. Yes, the Pistons won, but Cade did not play the last 15 minutes of the game. Monty Williams did decide to roll with Marcus Sasser, who finished the game 4 of 12 from the field. He had 11 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists. He was 1 of 7 from the field, and then the Pistons, I think, took a timeout. Or no, he was 1 of 7 from the field, and I think it was Cade, Isaiah Stewart, and Jalen Duren who went over to the table to check back in at the next dead ball. Before the next dead ball, Sasser hit a couple threes. And so then there was a timeout, and Cade ended up going back to the bench. Stewart and Duren did check in, and Sasser ended up closing that game over Cunningham. And watching the Pistons try to close that game out without him on the court was like watching a CYO team try to break a press from a high school basketball team. It was just really, really tough to watch, and you could tell they were missing Cunningham's presence out there. I mean, it wasn't just Sasser either. Ivy had his bad moments as well. I mean, he finished with 5 turnovers in the game and had some of them late. It was bad. And I get wanting to roll with your guys. I don't think Sasser was necessarily lighting the world on fire. I know he made a couple outside shots, but before that was not playing well. It just seems crazy to me to not have your best guy on the court, not have your best player on the court, especially when he's also your lead ball handler. Last thing I'll add on this before I turn it over to you, Jasper, is someone's lying. Because Isaiah Stewart after the game said Cade told Monty Williams not to put him back in and just roll with Sasser. Monty Williams said post-game that he decided to just roll with his guys and not bring Cade back in. So someone's lying there. I know it really doesn't matter, but I just think that's funny as well. It's just a little add-on to this little story. But overall, I couldn't believe Cade didn't close that game because Sasser finally made a couple threes after shooting the ball so badly. He then missed shots after those threes that he made as well. So just a really odd decision for me. But again, the Pistons did win that game. It was just a painful closeout.
Oh, it completely was. And we talked about a little bit of the similarities between Andre Drummond and Jalen Duren. Thank God for the Pistons that there is one thing they do not have in common, which is free throw shooting. Because Jalen Duren, if he doesn't hit those free throws down the stretch, you could absolutely see that turning into a really, really bad meltdown. Like, I think the Raptors absolutely could have won that game if Jalen Duren wasn't hitting his free throws for the Pistons. It's full disclosure. I ended up watching this game after I got home from work last night. And the only thing that was spoiled about it for me was me seeing a tweet, the one that you're referencing, about Isaiah Stewart saying Cade specifically told Monty, hey, don't bring me back into the game. So I was watching this game not knowing the result, but expecting at some point that the reason Cade didn't come back in is because Marcus Sasser went supernova in the fourth quarter. So I'm watching the first half and I see the second quarter and he is playing terribly and like not just playing poorly, but like his body language was awful too. There was multiple possessions where he wanted the ball and on the court he was pouting, like he's throwing up his arms in the corner, like being like, he's felt like Gigi Datome was back on the team with all these hand gestures that were being made, man. I was like, I didn't know Marcus Sasser was Italian. So there was no point in that game last night. It was nice that he hit a couple threes, but like, I didn't think he did a good job distributing the ball. I didn't think he did a good job getting into the paint. I thought he was shot chucking at times. So regardless of whether it was Cade or Monty, and my guess is that Monty Williams is saying it was my decision because he's like, well, players don't tell me what to do. I could see that really being a Monty Williams things right there. But I don't really understand why that was the decision to do that, especially since when the Pistons were struggling all this season, when the Pistons have been struggling, the guy who has been their constant is Cade Cunningham. I don't think they win that game if Cade doesn't come in the second quarter and settle everything down. They were in genuine danger of going down by 20 plus points because they could not hit a shot. There was no flow to the offense. They weren't even playing that poorly defensively, but the Raptors were missing shots. Like, that's what kept them in that game. The ugliness of it. I don't really get it. I don't. If you really wanted that win, I think Cade should have been in there, especially towards that little bit of a meltdown towards the end. But to finish up, I will play a little bit of devil's advocate. Look, this is a lost season, and these players are players that need to gain confidence. And I think Sasser is definitely one of them. You need to see what you have from him as a backup guard. And I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing in the world to say, as a coach or as a starting player in Cade Cunningham, a leader of the team, to say, hey, we need to give these guys some more confidence. Let them close it out. They got us to this point. Let's have them close it out. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. That being said, I would have put Cade back in, but I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate there.
That's fair. That's fair for sure. Looking ahead at the schedule for Detroit, things do start to get a little bit more complicated for them now. After these games against Charlotte and Toronto, they have Miami on Friday night, and the games against quote unquote winnable opponents are dwindling down for this team. I know they've got Memphis. I know they've got San Antonio in the last week or so of the year, but got a couple games against good teams coming up. I know Boston's down the line as well for Detroit. So let's see. Have the Pistons turned a corner, or did they just capitalize on playing a couple really bad, really injured teams over this last week or so? Jasper, anything else that you wanted to hit on before we wrap up this week's show?
Yeah, it's not for this next week specifically, but don't forget the Pistons play 9 of their last 11 games of this season on the road. And some of those games, yes, are against bad teams, but they're playing the Knicks, they're playing the Timberwolves, they're playing the 76ers, they're playing the Mavericks, all those games on the road. These are going to be tough games. And I think a lot of the things that we have been talking about in this podcast in terms of, are they replicable? Do these games mean much? Are these results really indicative of anything? I think these games are going to tell you a lot about the character of this team moving forward, because all of those teams are going to be motivated to win, and they're going to be playing at home. So I think this last little stretch of games for the Pistons, I think that these are in many ways crucial in seeing what aspects of the improvements of this team post All-Star break are for real and what aren't, and the things that you can build upon going into next year. I know that there's probably going to be a little bit of shutting guys down towards the end of this year, but I don't know if I'm so much in favor of that. I think the Pistons really do owe it to themselves, especially going into what is easily the most crucial offseason of most of these core players and Troy Weaver's tenure here. I think they kind of owe it to themselves to see exactly what they're made of in this last stretch of games. I'm very much looking forward to that. Yeah, if we're coming on here next week after 2 games against the Heat and then playing the Celtics, and we're talking about a 2-game win streak again, I'm going to be pretty happy with that.
Yeah, and before we go, I did want to mention that I have a piece up on the Palace of Pistons Substack. You can go check that out at palaceofpistons.com. Wrote about a couple bright spots for the Pistons after or through what has been truly a season from hell, but wrote about a couple guys that have been a bright spot throughout the year nonetheless, and talked a little bit about the offseason ahead for Detroit. So did want to mention that as well. You can follow us on X. You can follow us on Instagram or on TikTok. But make sure you're subscribing from wherever you're listening to this week's show. Leave us a like, leave us a review, leave us a comment in the YouTube section if you're watching there. We greatly appreciate all of you. But yeah, that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe. Again, make sure to use our promo code over at Bet Online. That's Believe, BLEAV, for a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Thanks so much to everyone that tuned in this week, and we will see you next week for another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. Take care, everyone.